The lemon chicken had cooled a bit by the time I sat down. I'd cooked it just the way he used to, like zestered into the marinade, crisp skin, roasted carrots on the side. The kind of meal I used to make when he got promoted at the clinic, or when Maisie drew something that deserved a fridge magnet. But tonight, he barely touched it. Evan sat across from me, jaw tense, his fork nudging a carrot as if it might bite back. I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. Again. Outside, the wind tapped the kitchen window with uneven fingers. Late October in Fort Collins always felt colder than I remembered. The kind of cold that didn't just hit your skin, it curled inside your bones and settled there. From the living room, Maisie hummed softly. Something she'd picked up from kindergarten, half melody, half magic. Her voice always made the walls feel less lonely. I refilled my water. He didn't look up. "You're not eating," I said, careful not to lace it with too much meaning. He blinked at the chicken like it was something distant. Then he set his fork down, aligned it perfectly with the knife, folded his hands, and looked me straight in the eye. "I don't love you anymore. We should end this." He said it the way he'd mentioned picking up dry cleaning, calm, clean. Like it was a box he'd been meaning to check off for weeks. My heart didn't stop. It didn't even race, it just stalled. Like a car in the cold. I stared at him. Not in disbelief, because deep down some part of me had already packed a suitcase. But in a quiet, hollow way, like staring into a fog you knew would never clear. Maisie's humming floated through the air, mixing with the ticking of the kitchen clock. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. "I've already spoken to someone," he said, placing it gently beside my plate. "She's thorough. You can call when you're ready." There was no edge to his voice. No cruelty. Just a sense of something rehearsed, like this was the 7th time he'd practiced it in the mirror. I didn't pick up the card. I looked down at my hands still wrapped around the water glass. The condensation had slipped through my fingers, pooling at the base, leaving a ring. Almost ironic. He pushed his chair back. "I'll stay at a hotel this week. I'll give you time." Time for what? To fall apart neatly. To make it easier for him to move on. Still, I said nothing. He stood, smoothed out his shirt, then turned toward the hallway and vanished without so much as checking on Maisie. The door clicked shut. I listened. To the click. To the silence. To the heater kicking on like it had something to say. Then I stood up, gathered the plates from the table, his mine untouched chicken, and walked them to the sink. The garbage lid snapped louder than I expected. Startled even me. I rinsed the dishes slowly. Let the water run hotter than it needed to. Not because I was cold, but because the silence in the house needed something louder. Maisie giggled in the living room. Something on her tablet must have been funny. Her laugh always had this way of cutting through even the worst parts of a day. I dried my hands. Walked to the drawer. Pulled out my phone, not thinking, just moving. There were names I hadn't dialed in years. Friends who drifted. Colleagues who vanished into careers. But one name sat like an anchor. Rachel Linwood. We hadn't talked since the Christmas I mailed her a card with Maisie in a red bow. She'd moved back to Boulder after leaving the firm. We'd lost touch, but I knew if anyone would understand the quiet urgency of what I needed right now, it would be her. The phone rang twice. Then, "Hey stranger," she answered, breathless but warm. "It's been a minute." I almost smiled. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I need your help." She paused just long enough for it to matter. "You okay, number?" "But I'm calm." That was all I offered, all I needed to. "Tell me what happened," she said, her tone shifting. No small talk. Just readiness. We talked logistics. Custody, assets, the house. Rachel asked questions I didn't have answers to yet. I gave her Evan's full name, the name of his firm, the city records on our mortgage. "Do not let him file first," she said finally. "I won't," I whispered. After we hung up, I looked down at the call log. It was the first time in months that I'd felt like I was doing something that mattered for myself. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't send Evan a text. Instead, I walked into the bedroom, turned on the lamp beside Maisie's art wall, and opened my jewelry drawer. The drawer made a soft creak. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. A tangle of bracelets I never wore anymore. A receipt from our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. A tiny silver locket that never really suited me, and the ring box. It wasn't velvet. Evan never liked anything too traditional. It was a smooth matte gray with a magnetic snap. I opened it. There it was, my wedding ring, still gleaming. Still lying like it had done nothing wrong. I had stopped wearing it 3 weeks ago quietly. Told myself it was because of the dishes. The gym. The cold. Truth was, it had started to feel foreign. Like I was borrowing a part of someone else's story. I picked it up and held it in my palm for a while. It felt heavier than it used to. Or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. Then I slid open the lower drawer. The one where I kept Maisie's first drawing. It was a purple house with crooked windows and a sun smiling down from the top corner. She was 3 when she made it. She said the little blob next to the tree was Mommy. I smiled without meaning to. Tucked the ring gently beside the drawing. And closed the drawer. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just a quiet end to something that had already ended long before tonight. I went back to the kitchen. Wiped down the table. Set up the coffee pot for morning. These were the things that kept my hands moving. That made sure I didn't spiral. Outside, the wind had picked up. The window rattled a bit, but the house held firm. I took one last look around the kitchen. The table was spotless. The dishwasher hummed faintly. Evan's card still sat where he'd placed it untouched. I didn't need it. I tore a sheet from the notepad near the fridge where I usually scribbled grocery lists or reminders about ballet class and wrote one word: handled. I folded it once, slid it over the attorney's card, and left them both face down on the counter. Maisie had fallen asleep on the couch, blanket tangled around her legs, one hand curled near her cheek. She was still humming in her dream, soft, rhythmic like a lullaby she hadn't outgrown. I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. We were going to be okay, not because I believed in miracles or justice, but because I knew how to rebuild from silence. Evan thought I'd break down. Maybe even beg, maybe cry, but I'd done all that in private. Weeks ago, quietly. Without witnesses. Tonight wasn't a breakdown. It was a beginning. A quiet one. But beginnings don't always need an audience. I stood, turned off the last lamp, and walked toward my room. Not to sleep, but to plan. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Rachel. I'd make a list. Names. Accounts. Documents. I knew this house better than anyone. I knew Evan even better. And I wasn't going to fight him with emotion. I'd fight him with information. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. He thought I'd break down. I just picked up the dishes and started planning. The pink bike was too small for Maisie. That was the first thing I noticed, its frame chipped along the handles. Training wheels slightly tilted like someone had been riding fast and hard. And the streamers, purple this time, fluttered in the wind like they belonged there. Maisie's bike had sunflowers. She always asked for those. Yellow and bright and loud, the way she liked to be seen. This one, it wasn't hers. I parked on the curb across from Carla's driveway. The same one I had pulled into for years. Same cracked concrete, same welcome sign with the faded bluebirds. Except now, there were 2 folding chairs on the porch, a red cooler tucked underneath, and a basket full of sidewalk chalk beside the door. Maisie kicked her shoes back and forth in the passenger seat. She had fallen asleep halfway through the drive and was only just now starting to realize where we were. I handed her the bag. Inside were Carla's favorite lemon cookies and a tin of English breakfast tea loose leaf. She'd once told me tea bags are for amateurs. I never forgot. Maisie yawned and rubbed her eyes. Are we surprising Grandma? I nodded. In a way, yes. I didn't tell her the truth, not yet. 4 hours of driving had given me enough time to rehearse a dozen versions of what I might say. But none of them sounded right. So I chose silence instead. We stepped out of the car together. The air smelled like pine and distant fireplace smoke. A breeze tugged at the hem of Maisie's jacket. Leaves crackled beneath her sneakers. Then I heard it. A soft squeak. Metal against concrete. I turned. The bike's front wheel shifted in the wind back and forth like a rocking chair with no one in it. And that's when I noticed the toys. Scattered by the porch steps, a red plastic truck, 2 mismatched sandals, and a stuffed dinosaur with one eye missing. Maisie leaned in closer. "Whose stuff is that?" I opened my mouth, and couldn't say a word. A voice called out from across the hedge. "Morning, thought I heard your car." It was Joyce, Carla's neighbor since forever. Still in her robe, balancing a mug and a bag of newspapers, her golden retriever Milo trailed behind her, tail wagging in slow loops. Maisie perked up. "Hi, Miss Joyce," Joyce beamed. "Look how much you've grown. And those boots, my goodness, are they sparkly enough?" Maisie twirled proudly, the sequins on her boots catching the sun. I forced a smile, nodded politely. Joyce leaned on the fence. "Surprised to see you again so soon," she said. "Didn't you just visit last weekend?" I blinked. "No," I said carefully. "That wasn't me." Joyce tilted her head. "Oh, maybe I got confused. There was someone here though. Carla's been active lately. I saw her going hiking with Brandon. And that sweet young woman with the boy, cutest little thing. They were laughing like they owned the mountain." Something in my chest tightened. Maisie tilted her head. "Grandma went hiking." Joyce chuckled. "She sure did. Didn't even need her cane. I told her she's aging backward." I held the cookie bag tighter. My fingers dug into the paper until it crinkled. "And the boy?" I asked. "The little one." Joyce sipped her coffee. "Oh, just adorable. Loves dinosaurs, I think. Always carrying that little green one around." "The young woman's probably his mom." Blonde, big smile. "She and Evan seem close. Real close." Time stopped. Or maybe it just slowed so that every word Joyce said landed like a pin dropped in an empty room. She smiled, completely unaware. "I should let you go. I'm sure Carla's happy to see her girls." Then she disappeared around the fence humming. Maisie looked up at me. "Can I go inside now?" I crouched next to her and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "Not just yet, baby." I walked up the path alone. Each step on the stone walkway felt like I was walking deeper into someone else's life. The pine trees swayed gently in the wind. A squirrel darted across the lawn, stopping just short of a red rubber ball lying in the grass. A child's ball. The pink bike was leaned against the porch railing. Its purple streamers fluttered in the breeze. But it wasn't Maisie's. No sunflower stickers. No little bell she always insisted was magic. I stopped at the foot of the porch. The window to the left of the door had sheer white curtains pulled halfway. I moved quietly, boots crunching just a little on the gravel, and peered in. The living room looked like someone had just finished laughing in it. There was a coffee mug with a cartoon T-Rex on the table. A fuzzy blanket bunched on the couch. And Evan. My Evan sitting on that couch like he had always belonged there. He wasn't alone. A blonde woman, young, maybe early 30s, sat beside him. He was holding her hand. They weren't talking. They were just sitting there, smiling, watching something on the television I couldn't see. A small boy ran into view dragging a green dinosaur toy. He tripped and they both laughed, Evan ruffling his hair like he'd done it 1,000 times. Then Carla appeared. No cane, no robe, no signs of illness. Just jeans, sneakers, and a tray of orange juice in her arms. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years. She said something, and they all laughed again. That's when Evan leaned forward, put his arm around the boy, kissed the woman's temple, whispered something. I pulled out my phone. My hand was shaking, so I used both. I hit record. His voice came through the window, muffled but clear enough. "This is home now. Maisie will adjust." My throat clenched. I couldn't move. Couldn't cry. Couldn't even feel angry. Not yet. Only one thought circled in my head again and again. He gave our daughter away. I turned away, didn't look back. Didn't need to. The images were already burned into my memory. A home I wasn't part of, a child I didn't know, a woman he held like I'd never existed. Evan looked happy. Not guilty, not caught, just settled. Each step down the porch felt heavier than the last. Like I was leaving behind something I couldn't name. Maisie was still in the car, legs swinging slightly, humming the same little song she always did when building puzzles. The brown paper bag with cookies and chamomile tea sat beside her, the kind of gift you bring to comfort someone. I opened the driver's door. Maisie looked up. "Mom, aren't we going in to see Grandma?" My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. I had to keep my voice even. "Not today, sweetheart, she's resting. We'll just leave her things on the porch." Maisie didn't ask anything else. But her eyes, those big round eyes like the moon in early winter, they weren't as bright as before. I reached over and tucked her hair behind her ear. She leaned against my shoulder like she always did on road trips. I wished I could freeze that moment. Seal it away. The wind had picked up. A single golden leaf brushed across the windshield. I started the engine and promised myself I would never drive back to this house again. Not for Carla. Not for Evan. But for me. And for the little girl sitting beside me. The one who is starting to understand that some betrayals don't come with shouting. They come with a pink bike, a strange boy's laughter, and the way someone smiles when they think you'll never find out. I parked halfway down the street before pulling out my phone. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something colder, like the silence that comes right before a snowstorm. I zoomed in through the side window. There they were. Evan, Jenna, the boy. They were in the living room now. She poured him something in a yellow sippy cup. Evan reached for it with a laugh and handed it to the child like he'd done it 1,000 times before, like he'd practiced. Then clear as day I heard it. "This is home now," Evan said, his voice almost gentle. "Maisie will adjust. Kids are resilient." My finger hovered over the record button. For 1 second I hesitated. Then I pressed it. I filmed until the moment passed. Until the boy ran into Jenna's arms. Until Evan reached behind her waist like he used to do with me. Then I lowered the phone and stared at the screen. No one had seen me. No one knew I'd been there. But I had the footage. And I had the truth. He hadn't just left us, he'd replaced us. Maisie was quiet for most of the ride home. She clutched the little gift bag in her lap like it still had a purpose. Like we were still delivering something to someone who deserved it. I didn't take it from her. Didn't say a word. Let her hold on to the version of the world she still believed in for now. That night after she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone screen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched him say it again. "This is home now. Maisie will adjust." He gave our daughter away, like she was something old he didn't need. Like we were leftovers from a life he no longer wanted. I hit save. Then I opened a folder on my phone and named it, "What He Left Behind." He told me to talk to his lawyer. Like it was just another item on his to-do list. Like he forgot who actually drafted our prenup. He didn't write a word of it. I did. Every line, every contingency, every clause. Back then I was the cautious one, the one who believed in clean agreements and clear protections. He had said he trusted me. I remember that night clearly. A bottle of Malbec takeout from that Thai place he loved and his ridiculous joke. "You sure take this law stuff too seriously, babe." I had laughed because I believed he'd never give me a reason to use it. I thought we were the kind of couple who'd grow old side by side, not apart with lawyers between us. Now that laugh lives in my memory with a bitter aftertaste. It was late. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft tick of the wall clock and the wind brushing against the windows. Maisie was asleep upstairs. She always asked for 3 stories. That night I read only 1. My voice kept catching in the middle. I sat alone with my laptop open and a cup of mint tea going cold beside me. The only light came from the lamp above the sink, casting long shadows across the wood grain of the table. I found the document buried in an old email chain labeled House Papers. There it was. Prenuptial agreement Nora Whitaker and Evan Callahan. Signed May 6, 2014. I opened the file and scrolled straight to the part I needed. Clause 8. It wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. In the event of adultery, the injured party shall receive 50% of the marital business assets in addition to their separate property. The unfaithful party forfeits all rights to spousal support regardless of duration of marriage. I read it twice. Then a third time. The legal words looked colder now than when I first wrote them. Back then they were just theory. Tonight they were reality. I leaned back and let the chair creak beneath me. The rain outside picked up, tapping steady against the glass, like it had something urgent to say. And I listened. Not to the rain, but to myself. To the part of me that had stayed quiet for too long. I printed the document. Held it in my hands like a relic from a past life. The ink still smelled sharp. The weight of the paper grounded me. Then I opened the drawer where I kept the folder from last month. It was blue. Just a basic plastic file with a little clear slot on the front. Inside were photos. Screenshots of messages. Copies of hotel bookings from when he said he was in Durango. A receipt from a wine bar in Telluride. I had labeled each item. Not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I had to remember what truth looked like. I added the prenup to the folder. It fit right behind the image of him holding her waist in the reflection of a cafe window. He looked relaxed. The same way he used to look at me. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned to the drawer near the pantry. Pulled out the small black USB stick I had used in college. Wiped it clean. Copied everything, every photo, every document. Every video, including the one from the porch where he had said to Jenna, "This is home now, Maisie will adjust." I named the folder Quiet Evidence. Then I uploaded a backup to a cloud drive I used for old recipes and tax files. Encrypted. Unnamed. Just in case. Maisie stirred upstairs. The old pipes made a soft knocking sound that always followed her turning over in bed. I waited, listening. She didn't wake. It was nearly midnight when I reached for my phone. I found Rachel's name in my contacts. We hadn't talked since spring. I didn't hesitate. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, steady, the same as it had been in law school when we were the only two women in a seminar full of men. "Nora. What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the folder. At the USB drive. At the glass of untouched tea. Then I said it. "I'm ready. I need to move fast." She didn't ask what I meant. Rachel was like that. Instead, she said, "All right. I'll draft the letter. We'll meet his attorney first thing next week." I exhaled long and slow, the kind of breath that only comes after you finally stop pretending. After the call ended, I sat there a while. The lamp on the counter cast a soft amber glow over the paperwork. It reminded me of quiet evenings back when Evan and I used to share tea and argue over which movie to stream. Now the only sound was the steady tapping of rain on the window. It had turned to a cold drizzle, not quite snow, but threatening. I picked up the ring box again, opened it. The band sat there untouched. Gold. Simple. Engraved on the inside with the words "always, even on hard days." I closed the box gently and slipped it into the bottom drawer next to the USB. From the fridge, I pulled out the construction paper drawing Maisie had made last week. It used to show 3 stick figures holding hands. She had redrawn it. Now there were 2. Me and her. She'd given me the biggest smile. I taped it to the fridge beside her class calendar and a recipe card I hadn't used in years. Then I stood back and looked at it. Really looked. I whispered just for myself. No more silence. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a threat. It was a quiet understanding that I had already crossed a line. Not the kind you shout over. The kind you walk through once, never to return. The clock read 2:30. My tea had gone cold. I poured it down the sink and rinsed the cup. The mug said "World's Best Mom," a faded gift from Mother's Day when Maisie was 4. I set it back on its shelf steady. Certain. Upstairs I checked on Maisie. She was curled under the comforter, her favorite stuffed fox tucked beneath her chin. I brushed a strand of hair off her forehead. She didn't stir. I watched her sleep a few minutes more. There was peace there. The kind of peace I would now protect with everything I had. Even if it meant walking into court with a folder full of truths I never wanted to gather. Even if it meant going alone. The next morning I dressed Maisie for school. She wanted braids, so I sat her on the stool and combed gently through her hair. She hummed under her breath. No questions about Dad. No mention of Durango. Just the steady trust of a 6-year-old waiting for breakfast and the next thing. After I dropped her off, I drove straight to the print shop downtown. It was quiet that early. An older man at the counter nodded without asking questions. I handed him the flash drive and watched him open the files. Color or black and white, he asked. Black and white, no covers. Just clean copies, I replied. He glanced up then down again. Some people can read stories without reading words. While he printed, I waited by the window. Outside, the trees had started to turn. Bright amber. Rust red. There was something about October in Fort Collins that always made me pause. When the man handed me the folder, I checked everything. Texts, hotel invoices. The image of Evan and that woman on the porch. All labeled. Chronological. Neat. The last page was the prenup. Highlighted in pale yellow. Clause 8. I ran my finger across the sentence like it might vanish if I blinked too fast. It didn't. I paid in cash. No questions asked. And when I walked out, I didn't look back. At home, I sat at the same kitchen table and laid everything out. 3 piles, one for Rachel, one for backup, one just for me. I placed the USB inside the envelope marked privet, slid it into a padded sleeve, sealed it, and pressed it into the bottom of Maisie's old craft box. The one with glitter stains and crooked letters on the lid that said "Made with Love." It felt right. To bury it among glue sticks and watercolor paint. Proof of betrayal hidden in what used to be joy. My phone buzzed. Rachel. We're good to meet his lawyer Tuesday, she said. I'll have the letter ready by then. You sure you want to go first? Yes, I said. And meant it. That night, after Maisie fell asleep with her storybook open on her chest, I returned to the kitchen. Only the lamp above the stove was on. It cast a soft amber glow enough to make the counters look cleaner than they were enough to make silence feel heavy. I opened the drawer beside the fridge. Inside, the small blue folder. Still there. Beneath it, the ring box. The same box Evan had used when he knelt on that frozen morning near the lake years ago. Back when promises felt full, I opened it. The ring still sparkled. Not as a symbol of love, not anymore. Now it was just metal and stone like everything else he gave me. It looked better than it ever really was. I closed the box, slid it back in, and rested my hand on top of the folder. Just for a second. Then I looked up at the mirror across the room above the sideboard. I barely recognized the woman looking back. But she looked ready. I whispered it aloud, not for anyone else, just to feel the shape of the words. No more silence. Then I turned off the lamp. And let the dark carry the weight of what came next. It was the kind of morning Denver saves for court dates. Bright sky, biting wind, just enough sun to make you second-guess your coat choice. Rachel and I arrived 10 minutes early. She didn't look at the menu, didn't glance at the pastries under the glass. She folded her hands over her leather case and said quietly, "Don't order anything you'll want to finish." I asked for a black coffee anyway. It arrived too quickly. Steam rose, then faded untouched. The cafe was just as I remembered from my clerkship days: marble tables, velvet chairs, low jazz whispering between clinks of polished silver. A place where deals were made under the illusion of civility. Blake Weller walked in at 9:01. He looked exactly like the type Evan would choose. Tailored navy suit, wallet, thin laptop bag, easy smile. The kind of man who called divorce a process and women like me emotional. He extended his hand to Rachel. She didn't take it. To a smooth transition, he offered, pulling out his chair. Rachel glanced at me. I gave the smallest nod. Blake turned to me then, as if I might still be the girl Evan once could interrupt mid-sentence. His voice lightened, too rehearsed. Nora, thank you for coming. We're aiming for an amicable path forward. Evan just wants to protect what he's built and, of course, ensure Maisie's well-being. Rachel slid the small black USB drive across the table. No words. Just the click of plastic against polished wood. Blake's fingers hovered before picking it up. He hesitated. What's this? Start with the folder labeled Clause 8, Rachel said. And that was when the atmosphere changed. Blake inserted the USB into his sleek gray tablet. His fingers moved quickly, tapping, scrolling, pausing. At first, nothing on his face changed. He read the prenup document like someone scanning a menu until he hit Clause 8. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. I watched it happen in real time. The confidence slipping. His gaze flicking up just once toward Rachel, then back down like it burned. Rachel didn't say a word. She didn't have to. He opened the folder labeled Supporting Evidence. Screenshots, dates, time-stamped hotel receipts, voice memos. And the video. There he was, Evan leaning against Carla's porch, railing, his voice casual. This is home now, Maisie will adjust. Blake didn't even finish the clip. He muted it halfway through and leaned back. His hands were perfectly still. His jaw not so much. I took a slow sip of the coffee. It had gone cold. The silence between us was louder than any courtroom speech. Finally Blake cleared his throat. Did Evan? No, you had this. Rachel tilted her head slightly. He knew what he did. Whether he expected consequences, well, that's a separate issue. He exhaled through his nose. Took another look at the screen, then shut the tablet gently. I saw the question form behind his eyes. How long had I been planning this? And maybe deeper, how did he underestimate me so badly? Blake looked at me then like he was really seeing me for the first time. Not as the wife left behind, but the woman holding the matchbook. I need to step outside for a moment, he said. He walked out quickly, leaving the tablet on the table like it was something infected. Rachel didn't move. Neither did I. The jazz music swelled just slightly, something with a slow saxophone and no name. Outside the window, Blake stood with his back to us, phone pressed to his ear. His hand ran through his hair. Twice. That was when I knew Evan had picked the wrong lawyer. Do you think he'll come back? I asked softly. Rachel finally sipped her coffee. Still calm, still composed. He'll come back to withdraw. Not to fight. I looked at the tablet again. That little device had just ended years of pretending. It felt strange, that quiet power. No doors slammed, no tears. Just truth arranged in folders and timestamps. I remembered something Evan once said during one of our early dates. You like order too much. Relax, Nora. And I had. For a while. But then I spent years keeping our life together while he slowly floated away. Now he was about to learn what order could do. Blake returned. No more polished charm. His tie was crooked now. He sat down heavily and looked at Rachel. Not me. I'll be withdrawing from representation, he said. There's a conflict of interest that was overlooked. Rachel didn't blink. That's your call, Blake. We'll notify the court of your withdrawal and send all materials directly. He turned to me. Nora. I didn't know. I nodded once. I know, and that was it. He stood to leave. No handshake. Just a brief glance toward Rachel, like he was trying to decide if she pitied him. She didn't. I watched him walk past the polished hostess stand, past the clean napkins, and through the revolving door that no longer welcomed him. The silence between us sat heavy for a moment, but it wasn't awkward, it was earned. Rachel tapped her pen twice on the side of her coffee cup. Then looked up. I'll follow up in writing. By this time tomorrow, he'll have no legal representation, no leverage, and no excuse. I nodded. But my eyes were on the window. The sky outside was washed in late afternoon gold. Downtown Denver buzzed uncaring, just like always. And yet, I felt a shift inside me, subtle, certain. Do you think he'll come at me? I asked. Not with fists, with guilt, with shame, with rehearsed regret. Rachel packed up the tablet and slid it into her briefcase. He might try. But you don't owe him your reaction. She paused, then added, "That's where your power lives, Nora." I leaned back, let her words settle. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about being done. Done playing small. Done absorbing his silence like it was mine to carry. I stood up. Gathered my scarf and bag. Rachel was already adjusting her coat, tapping out an email on her phone. We stepped outside into the crisp November air. The courthouse was 2 blocks away, but I didn't need to go there yet. We walked toward the parking structure in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said anymore. And when we reached my car, Rachel turned to me and said simply, "You're writing a different ending now." I didn't smile, I just nodded. Because she was right. When I got home that evening, the house felt colder than it should have. Maisie was already asleep, curled up sideways across her bed like she always did after a long day at school. Her small hands were tucked under her cheek. There was a crayon still on the pillow beside her. I pulled the blanket over her shoulder and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, just watching. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, unaware of the storm that had shifted course that day. Downstairs, I made a cup of tea I didn't finish. The mug stayed warm in my hands, not for comfort, just habit. I opened the drawer by the fridge. The blue folder was still there. But I didn't touch it. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was quieter. Sharper. Like the chill that moves through old wood floors when the heat hasn't kicked in yet. Evan thought he was prepared. Thought I'd flinch, cry, bargain. But the truth is, you stop fearing the fall when you've already learned how to land. That night I opened my laptop. Started a new document. Just a title. Not for court, not for lawyers. For me. It said after the silence. And that was enough. He expected me to fold. He forgot I deal with trauma every day. And I survive it quietly. I didn't knock. Rachel stood beside me, calm as always, holding the manila envelope like it weighed nothing. But we both knew what was inside. Thanksgiving weekend in Durango. The street was quiet, leaves blown against the curb wind, carrying the faint smell of cinnamon and roasting meat from somewhere nearby. Every porch had a wreath. Every window glowed with the kind of soft light people think means home. The house on Sunhaven Street looked like a picture. A picture someone else had painted over mine. Rachel rang the doorbell. 3 seconds later, the door opened. Carla Callahan stood there wearing a burgundy sweater and a forced smile. She wasn't expecting me. She definitely wasn't expecting Rachel. "Nora," she said, her tone flat, the smile cracking slightly. "This isn't a good time." I didn't answer. Rachel held up the envelope. "This won't take long." Behind her, Jenna appeared, still in pajama bottoms, a thankful heart mug trembling in her hand. Her eyes met mine and then dropped. No one moved. I stepped in. No coat removed. No greetings. The warmth inside wasn't welcoming, it was staged. I smelled cinnamon. Sage. Something sweet baking in the oven. Denial dressed in autumn garlands. We stood in the kitchen where everything was clean and quiet, until the sound of keys at the door. Evan walked in with a brown grocery bag in each arm. He saw Rachel first. Then me. Then the envelope. He froze. I saw the moment the air left his lungs. Evan didn't speak right away. He placed the bags down slowly, like the sound of paper could break the room further. "Nora," he finally said, voice low, too practiced. "You didn't call." Rachel set the envelope on the kitchen island. "I didn't come for conversation," I replied. "I came to deliver clarity." Jenna stood at the far end, back now against the counter. The mug in her hands was still trembling, though she tried to steady it with both palms. Carla hadn't moved. Her arms were folded tightly, lips pressed thin. Rachel slid the USB drive from her coat pocket and laid it on top of the envelope. A tiny object, quiet, but heavier than any of them could have expected. "What's this?" Evan asked, not touching it. "Evidence," Rachel answered. A violation of Clause 8 in the prenuptial agreement. Digital and physical. Time-stamped. Legally irrefutable. He blinked. Like the words had been in a language he'd forgotten he once understood. I stepped forward, never raising my voice. You said Maisie would adjust. That she didn't matter anymore. Jenna looked up startled. What? She whispered. Rachel pulled out a small device, clicked a button, and Evan's voice filled the room. This is home now. Maisie will adjust. The silence afterward wasn't silence. It was implosion. Jenna slowly lowered the mug to the counter. Her eyes were glass, her cheeks pale. You said that, she asked Evan. He looked down, saying nothing. Carla exhaled sharply. You shouldn't be here, Nora, she said, her voice cracking. But I am, I replied, and so is the truth. Evan stepped back like the words had hit him. Not hard, not loud, but precise, like a blade slipping between layers he thought were safe. I didn't mean it that way, he muttered. Rachel didn't flinch. I'm not your therapist, Evan. I'm your legal opposition. Jenna shook her head, arms crossed tight against her chest now. I thought she started, but the words faded. I turned to Evan. Still calm. Still steady. You want to list what else you didn't mean? I pulled out my own copy of the dates. The 12th of March. Text from your hotel in Boulder. You said you were at a medical retreat. He opened his mouth, but I continued. The 7th of April. Maisie's recital. You said the roads were icy. Your car's GPS logged you at the Skyridge Inn, room 204. I dropped a printout on the counter beside the mug Jenna had left behind. And May 2nd. The day you told Carla you were staying late at the clinic. I looked at her. You were actually in Breckenridge. Ski weekend with Jenna. There's a receipt under your name. You paid with the joint card. Carla's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted toward Evan, then Jenna, then the table where the paperwork lay in quiet judgment. You lied to all of us, I said. To your daughter. To your mother. And to a woman you made believe she was building a life on truth. Evan looked like he wanted to disappear inside the floor. His hands gripped the edge of the counter. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Not when the facts had done all the shouting for me. Jenna backed away from the counter. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know about the prenup or Maisie or... She looked at Evan. Did you ever plan to tell me? Evan shook his head. But it wasn't a no. It was that lost, wordless kind of shake people use when the truth corners them. Carla finally moved. She walked around the island and stood between us all. This is not the place, she snapped, eyes sharp. You should have handled this in court, not here. Rachel was already placing the remaining documents on the table. Actually, she said without looking up, it's precisely the right place. This is where the choices were made, so this is where we clarify what they cost. I said nothing. Jenna's mascara had started to smudge. She tried wiping her cheek, then gave up halfway. Her voice turned hollow. I left everything for him. My apartment, my job. I thought we were. She laughed. A dry, aching sound. I thought I was the second chance. Carla turned to Evan. Her face had changed. The smooth layer of motherly composure cracked, and for a moment the real disappointment bled through. You should have picked her, she said. Then her voice dropped. Not this mess. The words floated. Hung in the air. No one tried to take them back, not even her. Evan's shoulders slumped. Rachel zipped the case folder shut. The house, she said calmly, is not protected. Not under your name. Not under any trust. And now, not under illusion. I turned to Evan. You made a life here, a story without us. And now it gets to end the way it began, with choices you thought would stay buried. I didn't stay to watch them fall apart. That was never the point. Rachel gathered the signed copies and slipped them back into her briefcase. Jenna had retreated down the hallway, the sound of her steps thin and uncertain. Evan stood still like a man realizing the walls had always been made of glass. He just never noticed the cracks. Carla didn't speak again. She stared at me, but the judgment was gone. Only recognition remained. Not admiration, not regret. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a woman she couldn't dismiss anymore. I walked toward the door, each step calm, measured. I paused at the frame, my hand resting on the handle. I didn't look back when I spoke. My daughter isn't disposable. I turned slightly. And now neither am I. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors. Just the click of it shutting behind me, final, unremarkable, complete. Outside, the air felt colder. The wind sharper. But it carried something new. Breath. Rachel didn't say anything as we walked to the car. She didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can offer someone who's finally finished being silenced. As she started the engine, I looked at the house one last time. Not to mourn it. Not to reclaim it. Just to acknowledge, he gave everything away. For less than nothing. And I left with everything that mattered. The apartment wasn't big, but it was clean. Sunlight slipped through the gauzy curtains. I hung last winter pooling across the kitchen counter where pink cupcakes waited in neat rows. There were fingerprints on the fridge, a banner spelling out 7 in glitter, and a faint scent of lavender soap from the bathroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Maisie twirled once across the living room in her new purple skirt. It spins like a ballerina, she beamed. You are a ballerina, I said, adjusting one of the streamers that had come loose above the entryway. Outside, the spring breeze nudged the window just enough to let the sound of sidewalk laughter drift in. Kids were gathering backpacks slung over shoulders, parents carrying juice boxes and foil-wrapped presents. Maisie paused. Do you think they'll like the cupcakes? I think they'll love them, I said, brushing a crumb from her cheek. Especially the ones you decorated. She looked proud. She had reason to be. This birthday, her 7th, looked nothing like the last. There was no distracted father with a phone in his lap. No fake smiles. No gifts she hadn't asked for from people she barely knew. Just Gwen, my coworker from the clinic, who brought over paper plates. Just a card from Rachel that said, "This year you didn't just survive, you rebuilt." Just real quiet joy. The doorbell rang. Maisie ran to open it, her voice high and excited. Hi. Come in, come in. We have strawberry ones and chocolate, but I ate the last vanilla, sorry. I stayed in the kitchen for a second longer, looking out the window before turning back to the party. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. Not to Evan. Not even to myself. Just about being here. Still here, and finally truly home. The laughter came in waves. Little feet pattered across the hardwood floor, and someone knocked over the bowl of popcorn with a dramatic gasp. Gwen picked it up, smiling as if she'd been a part of our lives forever. It's good chaos, she said, handing me a juice pouch. I leaned against the counter, letting my body exhale in ways it hadn't learned how to before. Not even during the calm days of the old house, because those days had always been laced with something unspoken. This is good, I replied, soft but certain. Maisie was in the middle of a dance-off with 2 other girls. She didn't look over her shoulder, didn't check the door, didn't whisper. Do you think he'll come like she had last year? This year, she was just a kid. Spinning, laughing, living. Gwen slid the card from Rachel across the counter. You read this yet? I nodded. More than once. The words were short-typed in Rachel's usual no-nonsense font, but the meaning had depth only time and pain could carve. This year, you didn't just survive, you rebuilt. Happy birthday to the girl who gave you reason and to the woman who found the way. I traced my thumb along the edge of the envelope, then tucked it between the refrigerator magnets next to a finger-painted sun and a crooked construction paper heart that simply read Mom. Outside the kitchen window, a shape caught my eye. Across the street, standing just beside a silver sedan, was Evan. He wasn't moving. Just watching. Hands in his pockets. No smile. No wave. He looked older somehow. Maybe because I wasn't carrying the weight of him anymore. He didn't cross the street. Didn't call out or even shift his stance. Just stood there like a man waiting for something that wasn't coming. I didn't move at first. Just held his gaze from the kitchen window. There was no anger in me anymore. No urge to shout or cry or ask why. That part of me had burned away somewhere between the divorce papers, the late-night emails to Rachel, and the first night Maisie called out from a bad dream, and I was the only one who came. Evan looked small. Not physically, but in the way that a person does when they no longer carry power over your life. When their presence shrinks down to the size of a distant memory, not a looming shadow. Maisie ran into the kitchen, her face flushed with joy. "Mom. Gwen says we can play the balloon game now, can we? Can we?" I smiled, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Of course, baby. Go get the others." She dashed off again, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon in the wind. I looked back out the window. Evan was still there. This time I turned my body fully toward the light-filled living room. And I didn't look back. It wasn't an act of defiance, it was just enough. He didn't knock. Didn't send a text. Didn't belong here anymore, and he knew it. Some doors don't need to be slammed to be closed. Some are locked quietly from the inside by the people who stayed when it was hardest. And that day I stayed. Not for him. For us. The cake had leaned a little to one side. The frosting was too thick in some parts, and Maisie had insisted on putting exactly 7 candles, then one more for next year. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When we brought it out, the room dimmed. Gwen hit the lights, and the kids gathered, singing louder than they needed to, like volume made the wish stronger. Maisie squinted at the flames. She closed her eyes. I watched her lips move in a silent whisper. Then one long breath. The flames flickered, danced, and vanished. Cheers erupted. Someone clapped too hard and knocked over a juice box. It didn't matter. I was still looking at her. At the little girl who had been through too much for her age. At the tiny shoulders that once curled inwards when things got too loud, too cold, too empty. She caught me watching. "Hey, Mom, yeah, sweetie." She leaned in, licking pink frosting from her thumb. "I don't really remember my birthday last year." A pause. "But I love this one." Something in my chest broke. Softly. Like a ribbon coming loose. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Just pulled her in and kissed her hair. Maisie didn't need the explanation. She just hugged back quick and tight, then darted off to the living room again, where balloons waited, and Gwen had somehow found a speaker that played Disney songs on repeat. And just like that, it was loud again. Warm. Messy. Whole. And somewhere between the laughter and frosting and crumpled napkins, I realized we'd already built a new home. One candle, one whisper, one day at a time. The guests left just after sunset. Maisie had fallen asleep halfway through stacking her new coloring books, her cheek pressed to the rug, one shoe still on. I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood there for a moment longer than I needed. Just listening to her breathe. Outside, the wind carried the last leaves of spring into the street. The city was quiet. Our little apartment quieter still. I made tea, lavender, her favorite now. The same scent I'd used to calm her the night Evan left. The same one I now kept in the bathroom because she said it made the house smell like Mom. The clock ticked. The dishes could wait. I sat by the window with my tea legs tucked under, watching the lights flicker in distant buildings. On the coffee table, a birthday card stood open. From Rachel. In her handwriting, neat and steady. "This year you didn't just survive, you rebuilt, and it shows." I smiled, tracing the edge of the envelope with one finger. Somewhere far away, Evan might still be trying to make sense of the version of me he never saw coming. But that no longer mattered. He wasn't in this home. He wasn't in this moment. Maisie stirred in the next room, murmured something in her sleep, then went still again. And I breathed. For the first time, in a long time, I wasn't holding anything in. No shame, no bitterness. No plan. Just peace. She had asked earlier, after the cake and games and quiet glances through the window, "Can we stay here forever?" I'd pulled her close, kissed her temple, and answered softly, "We already are, baby," and I meant it. The sun hadn't yet climbed past the rooftops when I heard Maisie's bare feet padding across the kitchen floor. She wore her birthday crown from last year, slightly bent on one side, but she looked proud like a queen in pajamas. "Can we start the cupcakes now?" she whispered, like it was a secret between just us two. I nodded, pulling out the mixing bowls while the kettle warmed for tea. The air smelled like vanilla and orange zest. We worked slowly, deliberately, me measuring flour, her cracking eggs too confidently. There was a time I would have corrected every splash, every crooked sprinkle. Now I just smiled. Letting go doesn't always feel like loss. Sometimes it's how you make space for joy. I let her choose the tablecloth. Out of all the ones I'd folded in the drawer, she picked a faded purple gingham. "Mama likes lavender," she said. I didn't even realize she noticed. The doorbell rang around 10. It was Gwen, my coworker turned friend, holding 2 bags and 1 apology. "I brought paper cups," she laughed, "because I know you'd pretend you didn't need them." I let her hug me. She always smelled like citrus and dry shampoo. I never told her how comforting that was. "You okay?" she asked. I looked around. The room was still quiet. Decorations half hung. A balloon floating near the floor. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel the buzz of nerves in my chest. "I think I am," I said. She patted my arm. "That's big, Nora. Bigger than these cupcakes." I chuckled. "Don't let Maisie hear you say that." We set up the party together, streamers taped between bookshelves, cupcakes aligned like a pastel army on the table. Maisie made place cards out of old index cards, each one with a drawing of the guest. She drew Gwen with big curly hair and a gold crown. "Why am I wearing a crown?" Gwen asked. "Because you helped Mama," Maisie said simply. I felt something shift inside me then. Not a crash. Not a breaking. Just a quiet rearranging. Around noon, the apartment filled with soft chatter and giggles. Children from Maisie's class arrived with hand-painted cards and messy bows. Some of the parents stayed to chat in the hallway. I heard someone mention how warm the apartment felt, not the temperature, but something else. I quietly hoped that was true. Then came the knock I didn't expect. 3 short taps, then silence. I opened the door and found Mildred, my neighbor from 2 floors down, dressed in her usual pale cardigan and silver clip earrings. She held a flat rectangular box wrapped in brown paper. "I heard there's a birthday girl in here," she said with a wink. Maisie peeked around my hip. "Hi, Miss Millie." Mildred knelt to Maisie's eye level. "This is for you, sweetheart. It's not a toy, but I made it myself, so that makes it kind of special." Inside the wrapping was a framed painting. Lavender fields under a golden sky done in soft watercolors. Not perfect, but tender and true. Maisie traced the flowers with her fingertip. "I love purple," she whispered. "I know you do," Mildred said. Then she turned to me. "Do you know," she said gently, "it took me 5 whole years to stop wondering if I'd made the wrong choice leaving my husband. And then one day I woke up and realized I'd been breathing easier for most of them." I didn't respond right away. Because some truths don't require a reply, they just need a place to land. We hung her painting on the wall behind the table where the sun hit it just right. It caught every brushstroke, every wavering line. Maisie said it looked like something real and happy at the same time. I couldn't have said it better. As people sang the birthday song later, Mildred stood beside me. Not clapping. Just smiling. She'd lived long enough to know joy like this wasn't loud. It was solid, rooted, and worth every year it took to get here. The last candle flickered out just after 5. Most of the kids had gone home. A few paper crowns remained crumpled on the couch, and a lone balloon drifted slowly toward the ceiling. Maisie was curled up on a pillow fort Gwen had helped build. Her fingers smeared with frosting, her eyes heavy but still watching the glow of a string light in the corner. I sat across the room, tea in hand, and for the first time all day let myself feel the stillness. I looked around. At the hand-painted banner she'd made from notebook paper. At the lavender soap she picked out for the bathroom. At the uneven stack of birthday cards. Everything in this apartment had a reason. Had meaning. And none of it came from Evan. A soft knock tapped at the window. I turned. He was standing across the street again. Same place. Same stillness. But this time he wasn't alone. Carla stood beside him. They weren't talking. They weren't smiling. They just stood there. Evan looked like a man waiting for something he'd already lost. I didn't wave. Didn't move. Just reached up slowly and pulled the curtain closed. Inside, the apartment grew warmer. The smell of vanilla still lingered, and the soft hum of Maisie's breathing became the only sound I noticed. She stirred and opened one eye. "Mama," I walked over, tucking her blanket under her chin. "Yes, baby," she yawned. "Can we do this again next year?" I kissed her forehead. "We can do this every year." Her fingers found mine in the quiet. Then, after a moment, "Can we stay here forever?" I smiled into the soft light. My voice didn't waver. "We already are, baby." And just like that, the chapter closed, not with noise, not with revenge, but with peace. And that I had learned was the rarest kind of victory there was. The apartment was quiet again. The paper crowns lay forgotten on the rug, and Maisie's tiny snores filled the corners of our home. I sat there for a long while, watching the light from the hallway nightlamp flicker against the lavender painting on our wall. That gift from Miss Mildred, so simple, so full of care, felt like a mirror of everything I had fought for. Something handmade, imperfect, but honest. When Evan and I first signed that prenup, he'd laughed as he said, "You sure take this law stuff too seriously." And I had laughed too back then. I thought seriousness was just part of my job. I didn't know it would be what saved me. They say marriage is about partnership, but I've come to learn that the true measure of love isn't what people promise at the altar. It's what they do when no one's looking. When things go wrong. When choices are hard. Evan chose the easy way out. He chose distance. He chose silence. And in the end, he chose a life that didn't have space for his daughter or for me. But I chose differently. I chose to stay present. To listen. To gather my strength piece by piece. I didn't scream. I didn't burn the house down. I planned. I protected. And when the time came, I let the truth speak for itself. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I owed that much to Maisie and to the woman I'd almost forgotten I was. There's a kind of grief that comes with betrayal. It doesn't announce itself like heartbreak. It's quieter, heavier. It seeps into routines, into coffee mugs, into toothbrush holders left untouched. And it takes time to clear out, to let light back in. But it does come back. The light, slowly, gently. Through a child's giggle, through a friend's steady voice. Through a Saturday morning when you realize you didn't cry waking up. For me, it came in the form of cupcakes with lopsided sprinkles, sticky handprints on the fridge, and the way Maisie whispered, "I love this birthday, Mama. Can we stay here forever?" And my answer without hesitation was, yes. Because I finally understood we already were. This life we rebuilt didn't come easy, but it came honestly. And that made all the difference. If you've ever been through something like this, if someone you loved once made you feel like you didn't matter, I want you to hear this. You do. Your presence. Your voice. Your love. They matter more than you know. And if you're still in the thick of it, still wondering how to start again, still afraid to take the first step, know this. It doesn't have to look perfect. It just has to be yours. Don't wait for someone to rescue you. Sometimes the rescue is the quiet decision to stop waiting. To get up. To make one good choice. Then another, and another. One day you'll look back not with anger, not even with regret, but with clarity. With gratitude that you left when you did. Or stayed true to yourself when it mattered most. Because no matter how broken things seem, you are never too far gone to begin again. And sometimes the smallest beginnings, a rented apartment, a child's laughter, a painting hung on the wall, become the strongest roots for the life you were always meant to live. Have you ever had to choose dignity over someone you once loved? I'd love to hear your story, your reflections, or even just one sentence about how you found your peace. Leave a comment below. And if this story stayed with you, Feel free to share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to start over with strength, with grace, and with your head held high. We're listening. And you're not alone.